Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Where this morning the Prime Minister called for a snap general election on June the 8th. Theresa May said Britain needs certainty, stability and strong leadership following the EU referendum. Explaining the decision, Mrs May says she has reluctantly come to the conclusion that a vote is necessary, adding the country is coming together, but Westminster is not. She'll need parliamentary approval to formally call the election. A vote on that will be held tomorrow. In the first of tonight's reports, our political editor Laura Kuensberg on this year's general election.
Did she surprise them? Did she surprise you? Did Theresa May even surprise herself? Her biggest decision as Prime Minister, taken only days ago.
I have just chaired a meeting of the Cabinet where we agreed that the government should call a general election to be held on the 8th of June.
That was not her plan. But she says to get Brexit done, she needs more support round here.
In recent weeks, Labour have threatened to vote against the final agreement we reach with the European Union. The Liberal Democrats have said they want to grind the business of government to a standstill. The Scottish National Party say they will vote against the legislation that formally repeals Britain's membership of the European Union. And unelected members of the House of Lords have vowed to fight us every step of the way. Our opponents believe, because the government's majority is so small, that our resolve will weaken and that they can force us to change course. They are wrong.
So tomorrow there'll be a vote in Parliament that will all but certainly get the process going. And if you're in any doubt about how the Tories will frame your choice?
I have only recently and reluctantly come to this conclusion. Since I became Prime Minister, I have said that there should be no election until 2020. But now I have concluded that the only way to guarantee certainty and stability for the years ahead is to hold this election and seek your support for the decisions I must take. Every vote for the Conservatives will make me stronger when I negotiate for Britain with the Prime Ministers, Presidents and Chancellors of the European Union. Every vote for the Conservatives will mean we can stick to our plan for a stronger Britain and take the right long-term decisions for a more secure future.
Most of her ministers had been in the dark. Only in the last few days did she decide.
Theresa May only moved in here 279 days ago, and she said consistently there should be no early general election. But quite simply, she has changed her mind. And what happens next to Theresa May will be up to you.
When did you know there was going to be
an day, isn't it? Great opportunities ahead.
When did you know, Secretary of State? A bit reluctant to tell us when you knew about the election. When did she change her mind, Chief Whip? When did the Prime Minister change her mind? When did she change?
It's a lovely day.
It's a lovely day, isn't it? When did you know there was going to be an election?
When I heard it this morning.
Labour will support tomorrow's vote to push the button, even though the weakness of Jeremy Corbyn is one of the reasons why an early election's on. Yet his supporters hope his ideas can cut through.
I welcome the opportunity for us to put the case to the people of Britain, to stand up against this government and its failed economic agenda, which has left our NHS in problems, which has left our schools underfunded, which has left so many people uncertain. We want to put a case out there for the people of Britain of a society that cares for all, an economy that works for all, and a Brexit that works for all.
More than ever, perhaps, this election won't just be about what happens here, but the whole country's constitution. The Tories won't promise another vote on independence in Scotland, but Nicola Sturgeon will.
Well, this is the biggest U-turn in recent political history, but it's very clear that the Prime Minister's announcement today is one all about the narrow interests of her own party, not the interests of the country overall.
Hello, team.
On the road already, as planned for the local elections, the Lib Dems see opportunity to come back from rock bottom.
Well, it's an opportunity for the people of this country to change the direction of this country, to decide that they do not want a hard Brexit, they want to keep Britain in the single market, and indeed it's an opportunity for us to have a decent, strong opposition in this country that we desperately need.
And don't the Tories start this election having gone back on their promise not to hold one?
Many people in the country will think, Theresa May told me she wouldn't do this, now she is doing this. How can I trust her? Why should I?
When the facts change, you change your mind, and that's when, as she said herself, she took time. She was reluctant to make this decision, but she was brought to this decision by the fact that presenting herself with a mandate which will allow us to get the best outcome for Brexit and the best outcome for Britain as a whole in her policy that she's presenting the country in this general election is the thing that's actually in the national interest.
That looks like, though, this election is entirely about Brexit, that Theresa May is so worried about how hard it will be that she thinks she needs a thumping majority of Tory backbenchers at her back to get it through.
Well, of course we want a strong mandate, but the aim here is to do two things. I mean, one is to provide a strong mandate for Brexit. The other one is to provide a strong mandate for the future.
The country will be asked for its view again, less than a year since the referendum, when everything round here changed.
I think she's been changing her mind over a little while, actually. I think that her instinct was not to do it for strong reasons, which she didn't want the public to think this is political. But I think that the whole sense and the nature of the Parliament has changed quite a lot in the last month or two.
This is the ultimate test for us, because that is what we are in politics for. We're in politics to win elections, to win power, to put our values into practice, and we've got to seize any opportunity we get to do that.
How many more times are you going to change your mind, Prime Minister?
Win well, and Theresa May escapes some political problems. But the hurly-burly of any campaign claims casualties too. Just ask anyone who's ever lived at this address. Laura Kunsberg, BBC News, Westminster.
Well, as you heard there, both Labour and the Liberal Democrats have welcomed the decision to call an early election. They now have just 7 weeks to make their pitch to the nation that they can be the ruling party, or at very least prevent a bigger Tory majority. Our deputy political editor John Pienaar now on the challenge for some of the opposition parties ahead of the general election.
Westminster's shutting up shop soon, again, and they're off, again. The soundbites, the slogans, all desperate for your attention. Why now? The Tories start strongly. Labour and its leader trail badly. So, loyal Jeremy Corbyn supporters are working hard from the start to beat the odds, to point up the issues and policies they hope may somehow prove the polls and the pundits wrong. The British public, when it comes to general elections, vote on leadership, and as of now, Jeremy Corbyn is a mile behind.
I think the more people focus on our programme and our leadership, the more tawdry what Theresa May is offering will seem. The British public don't want a Prime Minister hand in glove with Donald Trump. The British public did not vote to be poorer in the referendum on the EU. The more people focus on the issues and the people, the better it will be for us.
What about Jeremy Corbyn? I mean, is he going to be any kind of asset to you in your campaign, big on your election material?
Well, no, I'll be the candidate in Chester. It'll be my picture that's on the leaflets.
And not Jeremy Corbyn?
And it'll be my name on the ballot paper, so I'll be talking about my record and the things that I've achieved.
What about Jeremy Corbyn? Is he an asset or a liability, in a word?
Well, he attracts some people's favourable attention.
Good times for the Lib Dems seem a long time ago. In the last election, big hitters, cabinet ministers tumbled one after another. Now they're the most pro-Europe party in politics, and survivors of that famous rout believe they can turn scepticism about Brexit into support for them. They've got a lot of recovering to do.
If you look at the British political spectrum, there is quite a large centre ground, which certainly Jeremy Corbyn as a backbencher has never occupied, and which Theresa May, by pursuing the hard Brexit, doesn't also seem to want to occupy either, that is there for the taking for the Liberal Democrats.
So you're hoping this just might be the beginning of a comeback?
Let's put it no more highly than that, but I'd be very happy with the beginning of a comeback.
Tories sound confident, but some in former Lib Dem strongholds in London, the South West, expect a tough fight and just hope the Lib Dems aren't ready for the road back to Westminster.
I don't think the Liberal Democrats have actually restored their infrastructure from their dramatic losses over 2015.
But you know you're going to have a fight on your hands.
We're of course going to have a fight on our hands, and we're always going to fight to win as well.
Nigel Farage.
Since Nigel Farage left to seek his own political fortunes, backing Donald Trump, not leading UKIP after the EU referendum, the party's lost ground, lost the odd election they might have won. The referendum's gone, so is Nigel Farage. You're a party without a purpose.
Oh, come on, John. I don't buy that at all. You know, Theresa May well have triggered Article 50. The negotiations haven't started yet. If people want the Brexit that they voted for on June the 23rd, they'll only get that, I believe, if you get UKIP MPs elected to the House of Commons, and that's why we'll go into this Brexit election quite buoyant.
And the Greens, too, are sticking to their mission. You look optimistic, but you're going to need to be.
We're really optimistic because we are the party that's opposing extreme Brexit, opposing the decimation of our public services and providing those important environmental protections.
The Prime Minister's chosen a time of maximum advantage as she sees it to call this election, just as Prime Ministers always have and quite possibly always will. Now all parties will have to scramble to choose candidates, to raise millions in donations and in a rush to put together the policy manifestos that will decide Britain's future for the next 5 years. 51 days then to change or rehouse the tenants of this place. Excitement and drama for some, for others may be fed up with another election so soon, time may pass more slowly. It'll be a Brexit election, but Britain's future remains to be decided. John Pienaar, BBC News, Westminster.
Let's talk to our political editor, Laura Koonsberg, for a moment. Laura, this took all of us, or at least the Cabinet, by surprise. After repeatedly insisting that she would not call an election, why has Theresa May changed her mind and jumped now?
Well, I think her stated reasons are not quite the whole story. She says basically she's had no choice because of the opposition antics over Brexit. Now, it has been a bit tricky in the last couple of months for the government in Parliament getting their Brexit plans through, but it has not been impossible. So I think just like any big human decision, there is a mixture of motivations here. If she ends up with a bigger majority, as the Conservatives hope and expect, of course it will be easier for her to get her Brexit plans through Parliament here. Of course it will give her a stronger arm, stronger political muscle when she's dealing with those tricky negotiations with her EU counterparts. But it will also, ministers I've been talking to say, just give them that bit more time, that bit more breathing space to deliver the logistics of Brexit, because the negotiations won't be racing up towards a hard deadline of a general election in 2020 just when things are getting rough. And I think also crucially for Theresa May, it will give her more time and more political freedom to focus on the things she cares about apart from the European Union, whether that's schools or social care. So I think in a broad sense, she wants her own individual mandate, and she has come to believe that that is how she will get some political freedom, how she might be able to buy a ticket out of what's been a very constricted political situation, not of her own choosing. But of course, although the polls suggest she would end up with a hefty majority, polls tonight prove absolutely nothing. And the hurly-burly of any political campaign can have all sorts of unintended consequences and all sorts of unexpected political victims too.
Well, Laura, we'll come back to you a little bit later in the programme. For now, thank you very much. Well, more than 44 million people are likely to be eligible to vote in the general election. Some constituencies where the vote was close in the 2015 election, though, will attract particular attention. And one of those is Dewsbury in West Yorkshire, a seat which Labour gained from the Conservatives at the last election. Our correspondent Danny Savage is there. Danny.
Fiona, just 1,451 votes separated Labour from the Conservatives at the last general election here. This has to be one of the seats that Theresa May will be targeting in the hope of increasing her majority. Well, I've been talking to the voters in this constituency today and asking them what their priorities will be on June the 8th and if they've changed their minds since the last general election. Lunchtime today at the West Riding refreshment rooms in Dewsbury. Currently a Labour seat, it's the customers here that Theresa May hopes will swing her way. But this man, for one, isn't for turning.
I'm still kind of a supporter of what the Labour leadership is seeking to achieve, and certainly extremely negative about what Theresa May has been doing.
So you'll be voting Labour still? Nothing's changed since the last general election for you?
No.
The snap election was the talk of the tap room. The Upton family are surprised, but can see where the lines are going to be drawn.
The key issue has to be Brexit, and I think if there was a party that was campaigning to either stop the process or to come out of Brexit, I think that certainly would be the party that I would vote for.
I think it's a very brave and bold decision that she's made to go for a general election.
Do you think it will work for her, or it could backfire?
I think here, possibly not such a big gamble, but across the country I think it is more of a gamble.
It's the first general election since I've turned 18, and a lot of my friends are really excited to vote, but I have got no idea which way I'm going to vote, so I'm going to have to do some research.
So the campaigning that the parties are going to do over the next 6 weeks is vital to you?
Yeah, it will be.
Dewsbury is home to a large Asian community, but the voters we spoke to haven't changed their preference since the last election.
I will vote again for Labour.
Why?
Because Labour do better for a working class. So Conservative, they didn't do anything for the working class. They make more hard.
Labour, and we'll vote for Labour again.
So your mind hasn't been changed over the last 2 years?
No, I've been voting for a long time now, so I've always stuck to Labour. Yeah.
But in a nearby cafe, one businessman agreed with the reasoning behind today's surprise announcement.
I think it's a good thing for Theresa May, generally, and I do think hopefully it's needed to have a clearer mandate in order to go forward with Brexit.
Down here, my local MP.
Back at the bar at the railway station, George fits the profile the Prime Minister is looking for. He voted Labour last time, but is supporting the Tories this time.
I think they'll negotiate the best deal from the EU for our country's best interests.
So everyone has a new talking point. The final decision for many of them, though, is still pending. Danny Savage, BBC News, Dewsbury.
So what's been the reaction around the UK to today's announcement? Sarah Smith, our Scotland editor, is in Edinburgh. Chris Buckler is in Belfast for us. And our Wales political editor, Nick Savini, is in Cardiff. First to Sarah Smith. And Sarah, Nicola Sturgeon has described this as a huge political miscalculation by Theresa May.
Yes, and she thinks it's a miscalculation because Ms Sturgeon believes she can use this election to reinforce her mandate for another referendum on Scottish independence. You'll remember, of course, Theresa May has said that there can't be another referendum until well after the UK has left the EU. Well, it's not going to be Brexit that dominates this campaign in Scotland. Here, the arguments are all going to be about independence and whether there should be another vote on that. As voters across Scotland are asked to decide who they want to represent them in Westminster, the argument will be dominated by the question of whether Westminster should continue to govern Scotland. The issue of independence and whether Scotland should have another vote on that will be central to this election. Nicola Sturgeon says she's ready for the fight.
I think the Prime Minister has called this election for selfish, narrow party political interests, but she has called it, and therefore I relish the prospect of getting out there, standing up for Scotland's interests and values, standing up for Scotland's voice being heard, and standing against the ability of a right-wing Conservative Party to impose whatever policies it wants in Scotland.
The SNP believe this could be a great opportunity. If they turn in a strong performance at this election, it could bolster their arguments for another referendum on Scottish independence. The only problem is, they did so well in the 2015 election, winning 56 out of Scotland's 59 seats. It's hard to see how they could do any better. And if they lose some seats, well then of course their opponents will claim that shows Scottish voters don't want an independence referendum. Many voters who do not want an independent Scotland or another referendum now see the Tories as the staunch defenders of the Union, which they hope could attract more votes in this election.
I don't take any voters for granted, and nor should any other party, but we're fit for this fight, we're ready to go. We think we can put on seats across the country, and I think you'll find that peak Nat has passed and there'll be fewer SNP MPs after June the 8th. That's certainly what I'll be working towards.
The Scottish Labour leader was launching her local election campaign when the news came through from Westminster this morning.
We've made a slight adjustment to today's order.
Scottish Labour often struggle to make their arguments heard when the debate is dominated by the question of independence.
This is a chance for everyone across the United Kingdom to have their say about the type of government that they want. What you're going to see is a Labour campaign focused on Labour values, an alternative to Tory austerity. I think that's something worth fighting for.
The Scottish Lib Dems will also be arguing against another independence referendum.
We want to keep Scotland in the United Kingdom, and we want to keep the United Kingdom at the heart of Europe in this single market. That's the opportunity in this campaign.
There is a certain irony here, which will not be lost on Scottish voters. They were told by Theresa May now is not the time for a referendum on independence because politicians should be concentrating on Brexit. Well, now she's called an election that will be, in Scotland, all about that vote on independence. Sarah Smith, BBC News, Edinburgh.
Well, that's the view from Scotland. We'll go to Cardiff in a moment, but to Belfast next, and Chris Buckler. And Chris, both main parties there are seeing this election as an opportunity.
That is true, Fiona, but I suspect there are many others who feel that the last thing Northern Ireland needs is another vote. Bear in mind that there have already been 2 assembly elections in the last 12 months, the last one caused by the complete collapse of power sharing at Stormont, and that's a crisis that still has to be fixed. Stormont's parties had already missed 2 deadlines to try to form a government, and those talks were meant to continue in the days ahead. But calling this vote probably leaves them with virtually no chance of success, and probably already adds to that sense of political instability here. And that's because election campaigns here tend to be divisive. They tend to push the parties apart. Some commentators even call the last one nakedly sectarian. This one is unlikely to be very different. Unionists are already calling this an opportunity to vote for the Union, while Republicans are emphasising the potential negative impacts of Brexit and even calling for a referendum on a united Ireland. Meanwhile, with the UK Parliament now looking like it's going to be dissolved very soon, there is still that very real problem that there is no government at Stormont. Now, Westminster has 2 choices, one of which is to take over the running of Northern Ireland. The other is yet another Assembly election, which will go alongside this general election.
Chris Buckler in Belfast, thank you. Let's talk now to Nick Savini, who's in Cardiff for us this evening. And this decision's not gone down so well there, certainly among some.
That's right, although it's worth saying a number of political leaders in Wales have certainly given their impression, the impression that they want to roll up their sleeves and get stuck into this general election campaign. Leanne Wood, the leader of Plaid Cymru, said it was game on as soon as she heard. The obvious exception here is Welsh Labour, and the leader of the Labour Party in Wales, Cadwyn Jones, who said that it's questioned whether it's in the national interest, questioned the timing, even questioned what impact it would have on the peace process in Northern Ireland. The obvious omission here is the potential vulnerability in Wales for the Labour Party on a number of parliamentary seats. Now, Labour is the dominant force, but 2 years ago, the Conservatives were effective. Wales voted to leave. The calculation from the Tories will be that there will be many people in Wales who will want to give Theresa May a mandate to take the UK out of the EU. Elsewhere, for wildly differing reasons, the Lib Dems and UKIP will also both feel there are opportunities. So no shortage of enthusiasm from many political leaders. I guess the question is whether that's shared from among the wider Welsh public. There have been fewer votes and referendums in Wales than Scotland and Northern Ireland, but certainly Wales has had more than its fair share of votes in recent years.
We shall see. Nick Savini in Cardiff, thank you. Well, the country will go to the polls in just 7 weeks. Theresa May will be hoping to build on her working parliamentary majority of 17. Our political correspondent Vicky Young looks at the numbers and where the key battlegrounds for seats are likely to be.
Theresa May says she wants certainty and stability for the UK, and for her that means a clear Conservative election victory. She's made the calculation that she can improve on her party's performance 2 years ago. This is the electoral map showing the results of the 2015 general election. Most striking are the swathes of blue across England and SNP dominance in Scotland. But look at the number of seats. The Conservatives picked up 331. Labour won 232, the SNP 56. The Lib Dems and DUP 8 seats each. With other parties factored in, it left the Tories with a very slim majority of just 12. So, where will the Tories try to boost their numbers? The North West and the Midlands are crucial battlegrounds. Here, there are numerous marginal constituencies where very few votes separate Conservative and Labour. At the last election, Labour made little headway here, and they face a huge challenge.
Certainly, Theresa May is calling this election against a backdrop where she is very, very much the favourite to win. And in truth, against a backdrop where no opposition party has ever gone into an election in such a weak position in the opinion polls.
Now, Labour desperately need a revival in Scotland if they're to form the next government. But the Tories and Lib Dems will also be hoping to prize some seats away from the SNP. Fascinating too will be the southwest of England, the Lib Dems' former heartland. They were wiped out here at the last election and are hoping for a comeback. But how will their pro-EU message go down in a region that voted for Brexit? The Prime Minister seems to be trying to make this a Brexit election. If you look at last year's referendum result, you can see why. Remain in yellow, leave in blue. How Britain voted then could have a big impact on the result in June. Will areas that voted Remain deliver a bruising message to Theresa May? General election campaigns can be unpredictable, and just 2 years after the last one, voters must decide again whether there will be dramatic changes to the electoral map of Britain.
So what appetite is there for another general election, just 2 years after the last one and a year after the EU referendum? John Kay has been talking to voters in Bristol.
This is Brenda. In her lifetime, there have been 19 general elections. So when we told her there was going to be number 20...
You're joking. Not another one? Oh, for God's sake, I can't stand this. There's too much politics going on at the moment. Why does she need to do it?
She says this will produce clarity, it gets things out in the open, sorts things out.
I thought she said that initially when she took over.
Brenda spoke for many of the voters we met here in Bristol today. Regardless of party politics, we found little enthusiasm.
Are you excited about another election?
No, no, not another one. It's too much, isn't it?
They're just taking advantage of a bad situation at the moment. So, all in all, it's not good for the country.
But others welcome the chance to have another say.
Do you feel ready for a general election?
Yeah, we need one.
It'd be nice if there was some sort of clarity over what's going on. There's a lot of muddled information out there.
As for Brenda, the politicians have 7 weeks to get her out to vote.
I think the whole country has had enough of politics, politicians telling us this, that and the other, and to have us in June for a general election, no, definitely not.
You could stand.
I wouldn't want to, my dear, because I don't play the game.
John Kay, BBC News, Bristol.
Well, just hours after Theresa May stood out here and made her call for a snap general election, it's already being referred to as the Brexit election. How's it going down in Europe? Let's talk to our Europe editor, Katya Adler, who joins us from Paris. What's the response been in Brussels, Katya?
Well, Fiona, officially in Brussels and the rest of the EU, one country's election is its domestic affair. But quietly and behind closed doors this evening, there is a strong sense of optimism. One very high-level EU source said to me this evening that he thought the chances of a good Brexit deal for both sides had now gone up enormously. He said that if Theresa May wins a resounding victory at the poll, that triumph would be hers, he said, and not those of who he called her hardline Brexiteers. The EU would then get a strong, reliable negotiating partner, he said, and he believed that that would be good for both partners in the negotiation. There are thoughts that this could actually speed up the process, so there could be talks about a future UK-EU trade relationship far earlier than imagined if talks go well, as soon, I've been told, as the end of September after the German elections, but again, if all goes smoothly.
Katya in Paris, thank you. And let's talk once more to our political editor, Laura Koonsberg. Laura, let's just get some final thoughts from you on today's announcement. Where do you think this is likely to be won or lost, this general election?
Well, I think, as in any campaign, it's hard to predict what will bubble up. It will be about policies, it will be about personalities of the party leaders, it will be also about the parties themselves. But I think more than anything else, even though it will feel different in different parts of the country, it will feel like an election all about Brexit. Because Theresa May herself has made it so. She has directly, in a way that leaders haven't done for some time, directly asked the British people for a mandate to get that job done. very specifically, very clearly. And even though there will be other things that she and of course the other political parties want to talk about, that I think it's hard to see it not being the main theme of what actually happens in the next 7 weeks or so. There's a real irony here though, because of course one of the reasons Theresa May did not want to have an early election was because she wanted to get Brexit done and dusted before actually having the next vote for the whole country in 2020. But it appears, talking to ministers, that as the complexities of that has become real, it has been her calculation the canniest move is to do this, do it now, get it out of the way, with her hope, a hope of course at this stage, that she ends up with a bigger majority and life becomes much easier. We know today, from today, that Theresa May has been very, very good at keeping secrets. What we don't know, of course, is whether or not her talents extend to winning elections.
Laura, thank you very much.
But when I met her this afternoon, I pointed out that the weakness of the government's position in Parliament has been crystal clear all through the months when she said she wouldn't go to the country early.
Nothing fundamental has changed, except the opinion polls, which put you in the lead. So it is pragmatic, cynical self-interest.
No, this is about what is going to be in the best long-term interests of this country. What became clear is that although people in the country have united and recognised the need to take the country forward, actually there are divisions here in Westminster.
Was there a specific moment when you changed your mind on this?
Before Easter, I spent a few days walking in Wales with my husband, thought about this long and hard, and came to the decision that to provide that stability and certainty for the future, that this was the way to do it, to have an election. And, you know, I trust the British people. The British people gave the government a job to do in terms of coming out of the European Union. And I'm going to be asking the British people to put their trust in me in ensuring we deliver a success of that.
One specific risk relates to Scotland. First Minister Nicola Sturgeon is bound to say to the people of Scotland that they should vote for the SNP to give her further support for her view that she wants to take Scotland out of the UK.
I will be out there championing the cause of a united kingdom. I believe that we are stronger as a united kingdom. I think this union we have between Northern Ireland, England, Scotland and Wales is a very precious union. I think we all benefit by it.
It's also a critical juncture at the early start of Brexit negotiations, with EU leaders deciding essentially the structure of how to negotiate with us. Will you have the personal resource to put into those talks what's necessary?
Well, yes, but if you think about it, the timing that I said we will have of an election on the 8th of June means that over the next few weeks we will be having our election campaign at the time when the European Union will be getting their decisions about what they want to have in terms of the negotiating strategy together. So there is, if you like, this moment of opportunity for us to do this.
And in an emotional sense, having your own personal mandate rather than one inherited from David Cameron?
Obviously, I stood on the Conservative Party manifesto in 2015, but that manifesto was for a time when there was going to be a referendum, but there was a general assumption that we would stay in the EU. Things have changed. We're leaving the European Union. We need to look now for a different future.
So, a disaster for him, surely, with Labour 20-odd points behind in the polls, more unpopular as an opposition than at any time since the early 1980s.
I welcome the opportunity for us to put the case to the people of Britain to stand up against this government and its failed economic agenda, which has left our NHS in problems, which has left our schools underfunded, which has left so many people uncertain. We want to put a case out there for the people of Britain.
As for the Lib Dems, all but wiped out in 2015, their leader senses an opportunity for a revival from a direct appeal to all those who didn't want Brexit.
This is an election that gives Britain the chance to change the direction the Conservatives are taking us in, an opportunity to vote against a hard Brexit that I believe the majority of the people join with me in being opposed to keep us in the single market and to make sure that Britain has a strong and decent opposition.
Arguably the best address in Britain, no Prime Minister willingly moves out. Theresa May is risking it in the hope you don't evict her, but give her a new 5-year lease. Robert Peston, ITV News.
Well, the Prime Minister's announcement today signals the start of a frenetic few weeks. Tomorrow, Mrs May will go to the House of Commons to ask MPs to support an early general election. The Fixed-Term Parliaments Act sets elections for every 5 years and can only be overturned if 2/3 of MPs agree. Now, it is likely to pass with the support of Labour and the Lib Dems. Parliament is set to be dissolved on Wednesday, May the 3rd. And the next day, local elections will be held in England, Scotland and Wales. There'll then be a 5-week campaigning period until polls open for the general election on Thursday, June the 8th. Now, the political case for a fresh election is compelling for Theresa May. Her party is currently enjoying a huge lead in the polls, something not seen since the days of Margaret Thatcher. It could give the Conservatives a big Commons majority, but the move does carry with it big risks. Our political correspondent Libby Vina reports on May's gamble.
There should be no general election until 2020. I think if we were to have an early general election, it would just introduce another destabilising factor. I don't think that would be good for the economy, and I don't think it would be good for people and their jobs.
She'd repeatedly ruled it out, and it's a gamble she didn't need to take. Last summer, Theresa May got the keys to number 10 without even having to test her popularity with her party. So why has she taken the risk, and could it backfire? The polls suggest it's unlikely. The latest from YouGov puts the Tories more than 20% ahead of Labour. The Liberal Democrats were third on 12%, followed closely by UKIP on 10%. And as to who would make the best Prime Minister, half thought Theresa May, just 14% said Jeremy Corbyn, while 36% didn't know.
Her own personal ratings are really almost stratospheric for a sitting Prime Minister, and in particular she's a very long way ahead of Jeremy Corbyn, whose personal ratings are, of course, appalling, as bad as they've been for any leader for more than 30 years.
But how did the snap election announcement go down in the Labour-Tory marginal of Birmingham Northfield? Theresa May looks like she's made the right call, despite some voter fatigue.
It's such a big thing, Brexit, and before she can go forward with it, she's got to have the full backing of the country.
Always been Labour, and then since, I think, everything to do with Brexit and Jeremy Corbyn stepping up, no. It's changed my views on that party completely.
The only reason she's calling it is because she thinks she can win. And I definitely wouldn't vote for the other idiot.
At the moment,
but I'm not going down to vote. I'm not voting for the men and nothing, because they stand there, they lie to your face, and it isn't just one, it's over everything. So they can get lost. I'm not wasting shoe leather on them.
Having made such an issue of trust, did she in fact bow to pressure from senior Tories to produce her Easter surprise?
She's known as someone who is a steady-as-she-goes person, very risk-averse. Has she been pushed into this?
No one pushes Theresa May into things. You know, she makes up her own mind very carefully, over time, taking into account all the facts and considerations. That's what she's done in this case. This is absolutely in her character.
A risk-taker, after all, who hopes voters will now give her a fresh mandate. Libby Vina, ITV News, Westminster.
Scotland's First Minister Nicola Sturgeon said the Prime Minister had made a huge political miscalculation. She said Mrs May was determined to impose more cuts and push Britain further to the right. But she insisted the election would not be about independence. Our Scotland correspondent Peter Smith reports now on the Scottish question.
Nicola Sturgeon is still plotting what to do about Theresa May denying her an independence vote. But she says she won't make this election about a referendum.
I have a mandate for a referendum that was won in the Scottish Parliament election last May. This is an election about whether we want to see the Tories in a position where they can do whatever they want to Scotland, or whether we want to stand up and make sure we have strong voices fighting Scotland's corner.
The Prime Minister said now is not the time to talk about another referendum. But ironically enough, it's the Scottish Conservatives who'd be safer to focus on that issue rather than Brexit, given most Scots voted to remain.
The only party that's able to stand up to the SNP in Scotland and put forward that pro-UK argument is the Scottish Conservatives, and I'll be fighting that campaign with gusto.
This will be the 9th vote in just 7 years for people in Scotland. On the streets of Edinburgh this afternoon, there was not a huge appetite for going back to the polls.
I'm sick fed up of elections, referendums. What is it doing? It's doing nothing.
For Scotland, I think it will all be about our position both within the UK and our future within Europe.
What do you think about it?
Stop pushing me on that.
But people here will be pushed again for an answer. The majority of Scots have voted to be in the UK and the EU, but that's no longer an option. They will have to pick a side and a new direction for this country. Peter Smith, ITV News, Edinburgh.
OK, so let's get reaction too then from Wales and Northern Ireland. And our Wales correspondent Rupert Evelyn is in Cardiff and Mark Mallet is at Stormont. Well, first of all to Rupert, what are the key battles likely to be where you are?
Well, it's quite possible when Theresa May was on holiday here in Snowdonia, she looked at the political landscape and thought, I can win here too. Welsh Labour, who rule in the Welsh Assembly, will undoubtedly be feeling pretty nervous despite their bullish comments today. They certainly have the most to lose here. Plaid Cymru leader Leanne Wood said today, game on. She hasn't ruled out standing herself in this election. And UKIP, well, they had a very good vote last time round, but it's quite possible that they also stand to lose a fair bit. One political commentator said here today that this is quite possible that it will be the first post-war election in which Labour do not win the majority of seats in Wales.
Well, Northern Ireland is the one part of the United Kingdom where voters are becoming something of a bit election weary, this being the 4th trip to the polls in little over a year. 6 weeks after the last Assembly election, there still is no power-sharing executive here. Yes, there have been talks to try and restore devolution, but with the prospect of a general election, it now seems likely that those talks will take a back seat. Now, what have the politicians been saying? Well, the Democratic Unionist Party leader said that this was an opportunity for people to vote for the Union. Sinn Féin say it is a chance to vote against Brexit. And yes, while the Conservatives and Labours may try and build up support here, this will be about unionism versus nationalism. The age-old Northern Ireland sectarian battle lines have once again been drawn.
OK, Mark Mallet and Rupert Evelyn, thank you both. Now, the Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn today welcomed the snap general election, saying he'd put the interests of the majority first and fight against cuts. His party is still smarting from some high-profile defeats 2 years ago. Damon Green reports from West Yorkshire on Corbyn's challenge.
We've been very active in Morley and Outwood. We're out most weekends, we're out quite a lot on the doorstep. We have been for the last 2 years. We keep going.
Here in West Yorkshire, they say this surprise election wasn't a surprise to them. At this Labour club, the activists who were the backbone of the coming campaign have been out on the doorstep since 2015.
I give public notice that Andrea Marie Jenkins is duly elected.
The body blow to Labour that was the defeat of one of its biggest names, Shadow Chancellor Ed Balls.
When it first became clear that Ed had lost, how did that make you feel?
Devastated, and I could have wept when I just couldn't believe it. I just couldn't believe that he'd lost by such a small amount.
The winner that night was the Conservative Andrea Jenkins by just 422 votes. And if Labour are to have any chance of returning to power, this is a seat they have to win. MPs who did win that night and are loyal to the party leadership say they're in no doubt.
I'm absolutely confident if we get onto policies and what we're actually about and who we're actually looking after, I think the voters will vote Labour because the vast majority of this country are better off under a Labour government.
And here in Morley, whatever the bookmakers' odds against a Labour win nationwide, they're not bothered.
Other people have been given no chance of winning elections and then they've come round and won. You know, somebody like Donald Trump wasn't given much chance of winning, but he won. And it was the same with the Brexit. We need to do the same for the Labour Party now. People have written us off, but I think we can win.
Nobody ever won anything without being confident. Here, Labour have 51 days to turn confidence into votes. Damon Green, ITV News, in West Yorkshire.
The Lib Dems are hoping for a revival after a humiliating election night in 2015. 49 of their MPs lost their seats and the then leader, Nick Clegg, resigned. Geraint Vincent reports from Yeovil in the party's former heartland on Farron's fight.
Disastrous
Doesn't seem like quite enough to describe the Liberal Democrat performance in the last general election. Nearly 50 seats lost and the leader forced to resign. In their old stronghold of Yeovil, they lost thousands of votes to the Conservatives. But among Lib Dem activists here and now, the fight back is on.
Excited and very positive, because I feel that the Tories have done very little in this constituency.
And yes, OK, there's only 50 days up into the next election, but we've had a good, over a year since the last one, and people have had time to change their minds since then.
The Lib Dems will need lots of people in their southwestern heartlands to change their minds. They include areas which voted solidly in favour of leaving the EU.
But they'll begin to recapture those great heartlands in the southwest.
But your party leader talks about Brexit as being a calamity, and yet in the Lib Dem heartlands that you describe, people voted for Brexit. How are you going to campaign on that platform? How are you going to win votes there?
Let's wait and see. I think people did vote for Brexit, unquestionably. Some. Not many yet, but I think that tide will grow, are beginning to wonder whether they made the right decision. But what people did not vote for is the hard, brutal Brexit that Mrs May has chosen.
It's not all about Europe, say the activists. But if the Lib Dems are going to win back their heartlands, they have 7 weeks to convince voters that Brexit is a bad idea. Geraint Vincent, ITV News, Yeovil.
Right, well, let's get a final thought now from our political editor, Robert Peston. So we're all set then for June the 8th, are we?
Well, Theresa May, I think, had one of the most nerve-wracking starts to the day because she has to get in a vote tomorrow. 433 votes out of 559. That's a stonking majority she needs. And she couldn't have known how Labour and the Lib Dems would react. Now, they both said that they will vote to dissolve Parliament. Even then, there is still an element of risk tomorrow. I've spoken to a number of MPs who are terrified they're going to lose their seats. And, do they want to be turkeys voting for Christmas in that sense? I think there will be some abstentions and some votes against. But I think Theresa May will get her way because actually when it comes to it, you can't look the electorate in the eye and say you are frightened of their judgment. So yes, I think we are on course for another historic election, heaven help us.
Another one. All right, Robert, thank you very much indeed.
Just before Easter, the number 10 spokesman was still ruling out a snap election, as Theresa May had done herself in person repeatedly.
There should be no general election until 2020.
She promised that to the Tory MPs who backed her for the leadership and repeated that pledge as Prime Minister.
I'm not going to be calling a snap election. I've been very clear that I think we need that period of time, that stability.
The clergyman's daughter, seen at church on Easter Sunday, actually set up a secret unit in number 10 last autumn to explore the possibilities of an early election. Theresa May said it was actually on a walking holiday in Snowdonia last week that she weighed up the arguments for a snap poll. And with a 20-point-plus lead over Labour, weighed up the opinion polls, no doubt, as well. Jeremy Corbyn was on a local elections campaign visit to Birmingham, just one of the areas where voters will be asked to come out and vote in 2 weeks' time, and then again just 5 weeks later in a general election.
We've got a great crowd here and we're starting off on a campaign to change the face of this country. Thanks.
He was announcing a new policy, £10 a week rise in the carers' allowance. He must now decide at speed on his wider manifesto.
I want carers to be properly supported, but above all, I want a society where we value everyone, what they can give, what they can contribute, and what we can benefit from and learn from them. That's the kind of world we could live in. Let's go for it. Thank you very much.
He didn't mention Brexit. Theresa May focused on it and on the different leadership styles on offer from them both. But if you're hoping to see a revival of the TV debates that have dominated the last 2 general elections, don't hold your breath. 5 out of 7 of the party leaders from the last election have changed. Theresa May's team is saying she's not going to share the platform with them. It's a flat no to debates. Scotland's First Minister Nicola Sturgeon all but wrote off Labour's chances in the general election and said ever larger Tory majorities would boost support for Scottish independence.
Theresa May clearly sees the opportunity, given Labour's total disarray, to crush all opposition, get rid of anybody that disagrees with her and give herself a free hand to move the country in a ever rightward direction.
When he heard the news in Brussels, the European Council President Donald Tusk tweeted, "The news made him think of the thriller director Alfred Hitchcock directing Brexit. First an earthquake, and then the tension rises."
Every vote for the Conservatives will make it harder for opposition politicians who want to stop me from getting the job done.
The Prime Minister's already reassembled the 2015 election-winning team, including Sir Linton Crosby, who, like her, believes the political stars are aligned in her favour, and this moment must be ruthlessly exploited.
So here is the current state of the parties as this surprise campaign begins. The Conservatives hold 330 seats to Labour's 229. The SNP have 54 MPs, most taken from Labour last time, while the Lib Dems have just 9. The balance of seats are held by the parties in Northern Ireland, Wales and the Greens. UKIP currently has no seat after its sole MP left the party to sit as an independent. At the last election, the Conservatives took nearly 37% of the vote, ahead of Labour on 30%. UKIP took more than 12%, putting them third, as the Lib Dem vote share imploded. One poll tonight now shows the Conservatives taking 44% of the vote, putting them 21 points ahead of Labour, while the Lib Dems take back third spot from UKIP. That sort of result, which could take the Tories' slim 17-seat working majority into a lead of more than 100 seats. Of course, that's just one poll, and as we all know, they're not always the best predictions of the actual results. And Gary Gibbon is with me now. So, after denying it over and over again, why she changed her mind?
Because she thinks the stars are aligned in her favour in a way that they very rarely are for a politician. Just to crunch into those numbers that you were just showing there, what she thinks is that she has this appeal, even though she was a Remain voter herself, to Brexiteers in UKIP, for instance, and what Boris Johnson once called the lost tribe, the lost Tory tribe of UKIP. An awful lot of those voters might come back to a Theresa May-led Conservative Party, enough maybe to eat away at Labour majorities in some Labour-held seats. She thinks she'll get some Labour voters over in those seats. And although there is an acknowledgement in Tory circles that the Lib Dems will do quite well in some seats that they lost last time, there's an analysis that they don't think they'll do anything like as well as the Tories will in some Labour seats. And so this is a calculus, a risk worth taking.
Labour is refusing to accept that this is an election about Brexit.
No, that's right. Jeremy Corbyn did mention it in one of his exchanges today, and he said that he wanted a better kind of Brexit. But his focus was very much on an anti-austerity campaign. That's where he's going to try and fix it. Labour MPs are about to listen to their leader. They're not his favourite audience, and he's not their favourite speaker in a meeting of Labour MPs now. And just earlier today, there was a meeting of NEC officers, the National Executive. They were deciding whether Labour MPs, before they go into the election, should, if enough activists in the seat want it, be subject to some form of reselection. Now, for this even to come onto the agenda, it's now off the agenda. Labour doesn't think there's time to do it, but for this to come onto the agenda is really toxic in Labour circles. I have to say as well, for most of the last few months, it's been mainly Labour MPs who've been saying to me, actually, an early election might happen and might not be a bad idea. They think, those of them who don't support Jeremy Corbyn, you won't hear them saying it in the weeks to come, but privately, a lot of them think this is the moment that he should be tested in front of the public, as they see it, tested and failed, and then they feel their party can move on.
Thanks, Gary. Well, today's news comes as the Crown Prosecution Service is considering criminal charges against a raft of Conservative MPs and their agents over their expenses at the last general election. It follows a year-long investigation by this programme. Tonight, we have learned that the CPS is now considering charges against more than 30 individuals. Well, Paul McNamara joins me now. Paul.
Well, if you listen to what some Conservative MPs have been briefing to some journalists today, this general election wipes the slate clean. All of this just hopefully goes away now. Don't be so sure about that, is what our sources at the Crown Prosecution Service are telling us. As you said there, this programme revealed that a number of Conservative MPs at the last general election didn't declare their election expenses properly. This led to a police investigation. So far, 15 police forces have passed on files to the Crown Prosecution Service. The CPS have told us tonight they're looking at pressing charges against possibly 30 people. We don't know how many of those are MPs and how many are election agents, but it's a significant number, especially when you consider Theresa May's working majority is only 17 MPs. So this is a big issue for her, and it's been something that must have been weighing on her mind significantly. Tonight, a lot of Tory MPs are hoping well, this will be a general election now, no pesky by-elections. Hopefully this just goes away.
Paul McNamara, thank you. Well, let's go now to the Home Secretary, Amber Rudd, who joins us from our studio in Westminster. Let me just begin with this whole question then of election expenses. Was the prospect of a number of by-elections a factor in why you've called an early election?
Absolutely not. This election has been called for all the reasons the Prime Minister set out, which is that it's in our national interest to have a strong government with a strong majority able to go in and have that negotiation with the EU and beyond.
You've got a strong majority of 17. You don't need this at all. I mean, isn't there an issue here with believing politicians when for months, it seems, you've had a unit working on the feasibility of an election while telling us that you weren't going to call one?
I think you have to listen to what the Prime Minister said. She has a strong reputation for considering ideas and changes and proposals carefully and then acting on them. And that's exactly what she's done here. She's been very frank. She set out the fact that she came to this reluctantly. But if she has decided, as the Prime Minister, that it's in the national interest for us to have the general election now so we can then go into those negotiations with the EU from a position of strength, not thinking we're about to have an election which would put the EU at some advantage, then that must be the right thing to do. I think she should be taken at her word, and I think she set out the reasons very carefully and very clearly.
Well, it's hard to see how a period of election campaigning is in the national interest when we already had a stable government. What it looks like to many people is you're taking advantage of a 21% lead in the polls.
No,
it's in the Conservative Party's interest, not the country's.
Well, it's just not the case, Christian. And I mean, the fact is, if this goes through tomorrow, and don't forget, it's not just about the Prime Minister, it's also about the members of Parliament. It will be 50 days until a general election. There'll be an opportunity then for us to set out the case as the Conservatives, why we think we can have a strong, stable government and why we think a good majority would be good for the country. And Labour and Lib Dems can do the same. In a way, it'll be an opportunity for the public to actually hear the arguments. Now we've had the referendum. Article 50 has been triggered. We know we're leaving the European Union, but what sort of leaving does that mean? We can give people those answers to some of those questions.
Well, we're looking forward to your manifesto. In the last one, you said your ambition was to get net migration down to the tens of thousands. Is that going to be in this Conservative manifesto?
Well, you'll have to wait and see. The manifesto.
Are you going to ditch it?
The manifesto will be coming out shortly, and then we can all look at it and have, look at comparing it for differences and find out what the different parties are going to be going ahead with. I'm afraid I can't answer that question quite fully for you yet.
Have you had the conversation yet as the Home Secretary?
There's lots of considerations, lots of discussions going on about what's going to be in the manifesto over the next few days and beyond.
What about the triple lock on pensions, for example? Now, Labour have committed to that for the next Parliament. Is the Conservative Party going to commit to that?
Again, I'm afraid I can't give you an answer to that. We're going through our planning at the moment for the manifesto. All will be revealed when we set it out.
You don't seem very well prepared for a party that's just called a general election.
Well, as the Prime Minister said, she arrived at this recently and somewhat reluctantly, but she concluded it was the right thing to do. It will give us a strong mandate so that we can go forward, have those negotiations with the European Union and not be concerned about a general election just following the conclusion of those negotiations. And let's not forget that although Brexit is important, it is a major change and we approach it with our eyes open in that respect. There's so much more to be done as well. We want to take the opportunity to set that out in our manifesto as well.
Let me just bring you back to the question of election expenses and what the Crown Prosecution Service have told us today. If before June the 8th, any Conservative MPs are charged in connection with these cases, should they step aside or should they still contest the election?
Listen, we're not trying to get in the way at all of the proper due process of law. That must go ahead, but we believe that the Conservatives and the MPs in question and the agents have behaved properly. If there are any conclusions to the contrary, we will pay the fines, whatever is appropriate. But at the moment, what we've been focusing on today is the fact that we want to have this general election and we're making the case for it. The impact on the prosecutions, whether they make them or not, from the CPS is not impacted by this.
Amber Rudd, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, even before the snap election call, Labour's heartlands were already under attack from the Conservatives, campaigning in next month's local and mayoral elections, hoping to establish their hold on urban areas like the Midlands. Simeon Brown has been to Newcastle-under-Lyme in Staffordshire, where Labour hung on last time with the narrowest of margins. So what are their chances now? And are voters really up for yet another big vote?
Newcastle-under-Lyme has sent a Labour MP to Parliament for almost 100 years. But the Northern Staffordshire town voted in favour to leave the European Union, and the Labour majority now stands at just 650. This is exactly the kind of constituency that the Conservatives believe they can win. But what do voters here think about another election?
Everybody's sick of it. Well, I am anyway.
We're all sick of it, yeah. And everybody's sick of it. Everybody's saying one thing and doing something else.
Theresa May's broken promise over a snap election has not gone unnoticed. And in some quarters of Newcastle-under-Lyme, it's not unwelcomed either.
They're all fighting amongst themselves at the moment. So, you know, you listen to it in the House of Commons, they're always arguing. I think it'll just, you know, put it down straight in, that's it.
Along with serving lamb chops, Mark Anderson has been chewing the fat with his customers for 30 years. And from local chit-chat, he believes the area is ready for fresh meat.
At the end of the day, Theresa May was never voted in. So I think for her to continue, for everything for the leaving Europe, I think she needs that mandate of the people backing. And I think she'll get it.
But will Theresa May get it from this town? Last election, both Jeff and Eric say they voted Labour, but have not been convinced by Mr Corbyn's message.
I don't think he's strong enough at all.
He's not projecting enough, I don't think, for ordinary working class people. Yeah. They seem to have distanced themselves somewhat. The perception around here from my friends, who are, I think a lot of them are Labour supporters, is that it's become a sort of metropolitan elite group of people that are distanced themselves from ordinary working class people. And I think that's something that he's going to find it very difficult to overcome.
But Labour still have some ardent support here.
I've never voted anybody else. Labour's always been for the working class people. Conservatives have never been for the working class people. Never.
But with less than 1,000 votes in it, it's people like Richard who will determine what happens next.
So, you might say I'm a sort of a floating voter, but I have in my mind, if there is, who I would vote for, but we have to see near to the time when they start bringing out the policies.
Labour's problem is not only are they struggling to gain marginal voters, but they're vulnerable in seats they've held for a century.
Well, with me now is the Shadow Home Secretary, Diane Abbott. Is this election about Brexit or about something else?
This is a cut-and-run election. I think Theresa May must have said 11 times she wouldn't call this election. Now she has. But it's not about the good of the country. It's about the good of Theresa May. And we know that the voting public doesn't like unnecessary general elections. And I believe Theresa May will pay a price.
But you're finished, aren't you? I mean, you're 21 points behind in the polls.
No, we're not finished.
This is the beginning of the end of Jeremy Corbyn and you and all the rest?
No, we're not finished. First of all, this won't be the first time the polls have called an election wrong. Secondly, as I say, if you think back to 1974, who governs Britain? And the public said, well, you certainly don't, and delivered a hung parliament, and Ted Heath had to step down. It's a gratuitous, unnecessary general election. It's all about the internal politics of the Conservative Party.
So Jeremy Corbyn doesn't have to win this election to remain leader? What are you saying? I mean, there could be some sort of mishmash result.
I'm not anticipating us losing this election. Therefore, I'm not anticipating what's going to happen afterwards. We're going to fight this election to win.
Who's going to run your election campaign? I mean, we know Linton Crosby and his extremely successful machine is running the Tories. Who's in charge of the Labour one?
We don't have anyone as nasty and unscrupulous as Linton Crosby.
He's pretty effective though, isn't he?
Nasty. Well, he wasn't so effective in London. He ran a nasty, racist campaign in London. The Tories ran a nasty, racist campaign, and they still lost. And this is what's going to happen to them in the general, because this will be an unpleasant campaign. It will all be about immigration.
Did you really want to have reselections of Labour candidates? I mean, this idea of trigger ballots, or you thought it was a good idea?
That was a rumour. I mean, what we're going to do is sitting members of Parliament will be nodded through. I don't know where this rumour came from about it.
So there was no truth to the idea that the leadership was behind this idea?
It was a rumour. The position is, and it would be the only sensible position, is that sitting MPs will be nodded through.
Right. Theresa May is going to keep saying this is about Brexit and it's about strengthening our position on Brexit. What do you disagree with her?
Well, her position doesn't need strengthening. We had a referendum on Brexit. This is
so you agree with her on Brexit?
No, this is about strengthening Theresa May's position with her own party. She's terrified of her own backbenchers.
Yeah, but on the doorstep, voters are going to say, what's your view on Brexit?
Our view on Brexit is obviously we respect the vote, but we want a Brexit that will protect jobs and living standards. Theresa May wants a Brexit, which is all about immigration.
Diane Abbott, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Well, joining me now is the leader of UKIP, Paul Nuttall. Why are you even standing in this election? It's all over, isn't it? Who would you rather have as Prime Minister, Theresa May or Jeremy Corbyn? That's the question.
Well, to be honest with you, I'm not convinced that Theresa May will give us the Brexit that we all voted for on June 23rd. They've already beginning to backslide on immigration. You know, people voted on June 23rd not only to take back control of their borders, but to cut immigration. They're now saying that immigration figures will continue to be at this number for the next decade. Look,
but that's the choice, isn't it? The choice before people is Jeremy Corbyn as Prime Minister or Theresa May. No, with all due respect, it's not Paul Nuttall as Prime Minister, is it?
No, but
so which would you rather have?
No, the choice is who do you want as your local MP? And I believe if you get UKIP MPs elected to the House of Commons, we can act as the government's backbone in these negotiations. I believe that she will begin to barter things away, such as fisheries. We may end up paying a membership fee. That isn't what people voted for on June the 23rd. Look, if you want the real deal, you go out and you vote UKIP.
Are you going to stand again?
Yeah, I'll stand
Where
in this election.
Where are you going to stand?
Don't know yet. We've got a management committee meeting tomorrow morning. We'll look at the target seats. We'll look at how many candidates we'll put up. I'll have more answers for you.
Are you sure you're not in trouble, though, over your previous declarations in the by-election?
No, absolutely not. There's no problem there whatsoever. We're going to go into this campaign buoyant, confident, because you know why? Politics is now back on our turf. It's a bit like the European elections of 2014. If this is a Brexit election, we're in a good place.
What about Nigel Farage? Is he standing?
Yeah, I suspect Nigel Farage will stand. I don't know where he'll stand. He'll be in the management committee meeting tomorrow. But what we won't do is make the mistake that we made in 2015, where we had a sort of scattergun approach, where we basically spread our money evenly, spread our manpower evenly. We won't. We'll target sensibly and we'll drill down.
And you don't need Aaron Banks?
Well, look, you know, Aaron's a good guy, and I'll be speaking to Aaron over the next few days.
I'm not sure he's a big fan of yours, though, is he?
Oh, he's fine.
All right, Paul Nuttall, thank you very much indeed. Well, joining me now is the former Labour Cabinet Minister, Lord Mandelson. Theresa May says this is about Brexit. Jeremy Corbyn says this is about the NHS and austerity and the economy. What is it about?
Well, it will be about all those things, but one thing is for sure, central to the election choice will be Brexit. You know, it's quite wrong for the Prime Minister to maintain that she has to have an election because people are standing in the way of her negotiation. When I last looked, Parliament, both the Commons and the Lords, gave her huge majorities for the triggering of Article 50. Nobody is standing in her way of the negotiation. All some people are doing there, however, is standing up and demanding that we have a proper and thorough negotiation in the country's national interest and not in the interests of the wild men in her party who want a Brexit at all costs.
Now, I've heard you say in the past that every day you try and do something that hastens the end of Jeremy Corbyn. As it turns out, Theresa May have done it for you.
Well, we'll see what the outcome will be. But one thing I'm absolutely sure of, Chris, is this, that whilst the Labour Party and Jeremy Corbyn will be absolutely right to bring other issues into this campaign, their primary job, in my view, is to make sure that the Prime Minister is unable to take a mandate, to claim a mandate for from this election for a Brexit at any cost. They've got to pin her down on the detail. Already we've started to see how difficult questions, awkward choices, cracks are starting to appear in her own negotiating position. And what the Labour Party has got to do is to confront her with the harsh and very difficult realities of Brexit and pin down exactly what she is going to negotiate and how, so that we get the best outcome for the country and not one that simply the Daily Mail and the Sun and Rupert Murdoch and all those other wild people in her party would like her to take.
The Corbynistas often say, well, we're behind in the polls because of the Blairites and the New Labour lot, people like you, who criticise our agenda and our leader. Any truth in that?
Well, Jeremy Corbyn was re-elected as the leader of the Labour Party last year. He's been given, freedom to form policies, build a platform on which to stand for this election. I mean, he's completely in control of the party, its policies, its platform, and how we're going to conduct this election. And therefore, he'll also be owning the result.
Lord Mandelson, thank you very much indeed. Well, more from here in a moment. First, over to Kathy, who's in Bristol.
Thanks, Krish. Well, this will be the first electoral test for both party leaders and a Herculean challenge for Jeremy Corbyn, who says he wants the campaign to be about issues like health, the minimum wage and social justice for all. In fact, in his initial statements about the snap election, he didn't even mention the issue at its heart, Brexit. So I tried to catch up with the Labour leader to get some clarity on that as he arrived in the West Midlands for a pre-arranged visit to a volunteer centre. Jeremy Corbyn pressed ahead with a visit to Birmingham today to announce Labour's new policy on carers. Now he's got an entire manifesto to rustle up.
We've got a great crowd here and we're starting off on a campaign to change the face of this country. Thanks. Very confident, very confident.
But despite opinion polls suggesting his party will lose dozens of seats, the Labour leader said he relished going to the country.
Elections are about debate and discussion. That's what elections are. That's what democracy is about. So it's rather strange that only a couple of hours after calling for a general election to be held, the Prime Minister is saying she's not going to go into debates about it. Well, come on, let's have it on. Have the debate.
That's the kind of world we could live in. Let's go for it. Thank you very much.
But on the issue at the heart of the election, Brexit, Labour is split. Theresa May has made this clear that this is the Brexit election. So could people vote Labour in the knowledge that you could overturn Brexit if you won?
What we've said is we accept the results of the referendum. We recognise the result of the referendum. We've set down our negotiating points, which are about protecting the rights that we gained through European legislation and regulation, and above all, ensuring there is tariff-free access to a European market. Those are our negotiating points. I have reached out to Socialist Party leaders all across Europe, explained what our position is and asked for their support in these negotiations.
It was Mr Corbyn's lacklustre campaign during last year's EU referendum which triggered a second leadership contest, with many of his MPs warning the party was doomed unless he was replaced.
I've made it clear that I don't think it's working.
It's not working?
And Jeremy needs to think about his position.
Because if we're going to win the next election, we have got to gain votes, and at the moment we risk losing them.
But he survived, and now his critics fear the worst. Within hours of Theresa May's announcement, several Labour MPs said they'd quit rather than rallying to their leader's standard.
Our 6 pledges.
The last Labour leader carved his election pledges on a giant slab. Mr Corbyn doesn't yet have a paper draft up his sleeve. But after being obliterated in Scotland at the last election, his MPs worry humiliation in England is now all but set in stone. Well, unlike Labour, the Liberal Democrats want this campaign to be all about Brexit, hoping to cash in on Remain votes to recover from the electoral disaster for them of 2015. But it won't be as simple as that in many of their target areas, like the West Country, where voters turned their backs on the EU. Complicated too by the expenses scandal, where the Conservatives are accused of failing to properly declare spending on battle buses to win seats. From Wells in Somerset, our Home Affairs correspondent Andy Davies reports.
In the cathedral city of Wells, rarely do Conservatives concede defeat in general elections. But they did in 2010, losing to the Liberal Democrat candidate Tessa Munt. 5 years later, she lost out, the seat seized back by the Tories. Now she's gearing up for another attempt, and with some enthusiasm.
Your first reaction when you heard the news this morning?
Woo! Is that allowed?
But the Lib Dems,
yes.
Last time, complete disaster.
Yes.
Let's be honest.
Absolutely right.
You've got far too much ground to make up, surely, to make it have any real impact this time.
I don't think so. If you look at the election results around the country, you'll see we've been gaining members. And actually, in 2.5 hours today, we've just gained an extra 1,000 members. You know, our numbers are growing and growing and growing. People regret the fact we're no longer in government.
The sitting Tory MP here, James Heapy, is potentially under investigation after this programme revealed he may have failed to fully declare election expenses. He denies he's done anything wrong. And certainly at the City of Wells Bowls Club, it wasn't a topic fighting for attention.
Anyone here going to vote for the Lib Dems?
There were a couple, but this was a crowd largely backing Theresa May.
Oh, she's taken a big chance. I can't say anything. And I hope she'll win.
Now the country's decided,
that we're going, then we need somebody strong, and we need a strong government to get us through this difficult time.
But the Lib Dems think their avowedly pro-EU positioning could make a real difference this time round, and it appears to have rattled some Tories.
Reportedly, recent private polling for the Conservative Party suggested that an early election could hand back to the Lib Dems a significant number of seats they lost to the Tories in 2015, and particularly here in the southwest.
And for some voters here, the Lib Dems' clear Brexit message had filtered through.
General election, who are you going to vote for?
The anti-Brexit candidate.
Who is that?
I don't know.
Which party do you think epitomises the anti-Brexit vote?
At the moment it seems to be the Greens. It might also be the Liberal Democrats. I hope they have the courage to adopt that position very firmly.
Who do you think you would vote for?
Lib Dem.
Why?
Because I don't want Brexit to happen, and I think that the Tories need to be brought into line.
Up in the air once again goes the political fate of a nation. The tussle in Wells, one of many intriguing contests to come.
Well, in the last few minutes, the former UKIP leader Nigel Farage has been talking about the expenses scandal. Here he is.
I think the Tories were terrified of something breaking over the course of the next few months, by-elections to be held in September, certainly a dozen seats in which there was a possibility of a by-election, some say perhaps even as high as 20, and that for a government with a working majority of 12. And I have to pay credit to somebody on this. He was, for a period, a presenter on LBC. He's still a contributor, and he does Channel 4 News Politics every evening, and his name is Michael Crick.
Well, with me now is the Liberal Democrat leader, Tim Farron. Let me start by asking you about the expenses scandal. The CPS have told us that 30 Tories are being considered for charges. Do you think, as Nigel Farage says, that might have been a factor in the timing of this snap election?
Well, it's entirely possible that Theresa May looked at the CPS inquiry and the work that you've done on Channel 4 News to draw attention to this and thought, well, what the heck, let's go now. I have to say, we don't know. My initial assumption was that Theresa May looked across the dispatch box, saw in Jeremy Corbyn not just somebody who's not a plausible alternative Prime Minister, but not even a leader of the opposition, and thought it was the political equivalent of taking candy from a baby. And she's called this election for political partisan reasons, not for the country, in the same way that David Cameron called the referendum for partisan reasons, not for the country. It doesn't mean we're not up for it. We're very excited about the election. It's a great chance for the British people to choose a different direction.
OK, so let me be clear about what the campaign means if you vote for the Lib Dems. Is it a vote for a second EU referendum?
It's certainly a vote that at the end of the 2-year period that we're about to begin, that the deal that will be stitched up by government and bureaucrats in Brussels and Whitehall should not be imposed on the British people. They should have the final say. Whether you
so that is a second EU referendum?
A first referendum on the deal, because we're going to get a deal imposed upon us nobody voted for, and that's a shocking affront to democracy.
But the problem,
sorry, go on.
Well, the problem for you is that support for going ahead with Brexit is now higher than it was at the first referendum.
So I don't think there's any support for Theresa May imposing any old Brexit on the British people. And here's the thing, we've seen the electoral indications in the last, 9 or 10 months. The Liberal Democrats made these stunning 34 gains in local government by-elections since June, majority of them in Leave areas. And that's because this is not about 48 versus 52. This is about the 100% saying to Theresa May, I hope, hang about, don't impose a stitch-up on us, a Brussels Whitehall bureaucrat stitch-up, without us having the final say. What Theresa May is asking for is a blank cheque to deliver any old Brexit, no matter what impact it has on us. We say the people must decide at the end of all this.
OK, so put your money where your mouth is. How many seats do you think you can win with this kind of campaign?
I mean, I'm not going to make any guess whatsoever, because it would be a guess at this point. But, at a time where almost anything can happen politically, why couldn't the best thing happen? It seems to me that what we're facing now, yes, is dropping off a cliff edge of a hard Brexit that people did not vote for by and large, but it also means we've got no decent opposition. And what the Liberal Democrats offer is that real, decent, credible opposition on the biggest issue of the day that means Theresa May does not get a blank cheque to do whatever she likes.
What they also offer is potential coalition with the Conservatives. You wouldn't rule that out again?
Well, my sense is that we're looking at the moment at a coronation unless there's a decent, strong opposition. We know in Jeremy Corbyn, not only is he not an alternative Prime Minister, he's not even an effective leader of the opposition. The Liberal Democrats stand there to be the decent, strong opposition, to mean this is not a coronation and the British people have their say.
Metropolitan Remainers might like what they hear from you on Brexit, but what about social issues? I mean, take for an example, a while back I asked you whether it was true that you believed homosexuality was a sin, and you struggled to answer. Now you've had a while to consider that question. What is the answer?
I don't think I struggled to answer at all, Cathy. I talked about the fact that I'm not in a position to go making theological pronouncements, and I can promise you one thing.
You said we're all sinners.
Over the next 6 weeks, you know, I'm not going to spend my time talking theology or making pronouncements.
Well, but this is an important issue, though, for your voters. I mean, I asked you 3 times, did you think homosexuality was a sin?
So let me answer.
And you said we're all sinners. Is that still the answer?
So my sense, as a liberal, I'm passionate about equality, about equal marriage, about equal rights for LGBT people, for fighting not just for LGBT rights in this country, but overseas. But, you know, just because I'm a Christian, it would be a bit boring for everybody who spend the next 6 weeks asking me to make theological pronouncements. I am not planning to do so.
Tim Farron, thank you very much. Let's go now to John in Edinburgh.
Thank you, Cathy. Well, here in Scotland, this is something of a seismic moment, because the vote here will not be so much about Brexit as about independence and another chance to determine the future of the United Kingdom itself. Nicola Sturgeon called Mrs May's announcement a huge political miscalculation, and she'll be banking on Scottish voters rejecting not just the Tories, but throwing out Labour as well. No party in British politics has ever achieved what the Scottish National Party did in the 2015 general election, winning 56 out of the available 59 seats in Scotland. More than a massive vote of confidence, this was also a vote of despair with the Westminster-centred parties. Tories, Labour and Liberal Democrats secured just 1 seat each north of the border. Given that the election will now be fought on existing boundaries, Labour is thought likely to lose its last seat. The Liberal Democrats, if they do well in the UK nationally, might win 1 or 2 more seats. The Tories might capture 3 or 4. So the impact of Scotland in Westminster is likely to remain strong and unlikely to much affect the balance of seats in Westminster. In Scotland, though, this election will be strongly about whether Scotland holds another independence referendum. And here the strains for the union could intensify. Mrs May is taking a risk with some of the constituent elements of the union flag. A strong SNP showing could indicate that Scots are unfazed by the prospect of another vote on independence. Mrs May's general election call for June the 8th is an election Scotland does not want, but which the SNP will take full advantage of. The party will do all it can to play havoc with Brexit. Indeed, with Labour currently woolly about the EU referendum result, the SNP is likely to call a lot of the shots on this issue from north of the border.
This election will be very much an election about what kind of country we want Scotland to be and who determines the future direction of Scotland.
Make no mistake, the future of the Union is very much in play, and Mrs May has done nothing to reduce its force or to ensure that it doesn't intensify as an issue in the course of this campaign. On the streets of Edinburgh, the mood is one of fear and cynicism.
I think I'm really quite frightened of the prospect of a general election when here in Scotland there seems to be your vote doesn't actually count anymore. If you're Scottish, then we know that the people in Scotland have already decided where they're voting.
Clearly, a lot of it is going to be about Brexit, which is a vital issue, but we can't let the real issues that affect people get lost in that debate.
Well, I think it's quite cynical, but I do think it's right that there's a general election. I just hope people wake up to the fact that it's not just about Brexit, it's about other things.
I think what it might do is precipitate here a greater chance of going for an independence referendum.
And with me now, Kezia Dugdale, leader of the Scottish Labour Party, and the SNP's Derek Mackay, who is Cabinet Secretary for Finance and the Constitution. Derek Mackay, the very fact that this election has been called is very possibly down to you for having triggered this whole discussion of a second referendum on independence.
Well, I think it's a remarkable U-turn by the Prime Minister, and I think it's about the Prime Minister and the Tories trying to tighten their grip on the UK government and to oppose any opposition to their plans, which are increasingly right-wing. So it appears circumstances have led to the Prime Minister making this U-turn, in which we, of course, we won't stand in the way of a general election, but we'll absolutely stand up for Scotland.
Now, Kezia Dugdale, could you look your constituents in the eye and say, vote for the Prime Minister to be Jeremy Corbyn?
What I'll ask them to do is to vote for a Labour government, and I think there'll be very many SNP voters across the country when faced with the choice between a Tory government imposing austerity in Scotland and the alternative, which is a Labour government. They are representing the many, not the few.
But Jeremy Corbyn in number 10, people have to visualise that. Can you actually say to your electors, yes, vote for Jeremy Corbyn to be the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom?
Yes, I would, and I will, because every single Labour government is better than one day of a Tory government, and that's what I'll be focused on doing. It's a chance to end austerity. It's a chance to speak up for working people the length and breadth of the country. And actually, I think the question is for the SNP. What would they rather have, a Tory government or a Labour government? It suits their agenda to have the Tories in power in Westminster, but it doesn't suit Derek's constituents.
I think it's fair to say the SNP have provided very strong opposition within Westminster, and it's the vulnerability of the Labour Party that I think has given Theresa May the opportunity to call a general election. I think it's pretty clear that the Labour Party, in the poor state that they're in, has given her the confidence to do this. I do think, though, it's a miscalculation. She's taken this decision in the context of her positioning, trying to move the whole of the UK to the right.
The miscalculation is yours, and that actually that's miscalculation is that independence is moving away. But it isn't, is it? The polls don't suggest that.
Well, the polls are suggesting support for independence is strong, and Scotland should have a choice. We've secured the mandate at the Scottish Parliament, but we secured the mandate at the Scottish Parliament elections. But what we know from the polls now is that the SNP is incredibly strong in Scotland, even in the context of a Westminster election, and the Labour Party is vulnerable and weak, and that's precisely why the Tories have been so opportunistic.
Communities in Scotland like Linwood, where there's a tremendous amount of child poverty and deprivation, a lack of work for the next generation. It's the Labour Party that has the answers about how to create jobs for young people, to invest in their future. Which is why I have to keep saying to Derek, he has a choice to make now. Does he want to continue with the Tory government just so he can plod on with our argument for independence?
But
the
a lot of people,
majority of Scots want to leave behind them.
Kezia is well aware of the vulnerability of the Labour Party in the UK and Jeremy Corbyn's leadership. He is not alternative Prime Minister material. The SNP has been a strong voice for Scotland. Of course not. But the SNP has been a strong voice for Scotland, and we will continue to stand up against the austerity that's been delivered by the Tories.
We've got one point to which some people have talked to us about in the street, and that is you were the escape route for those people who don't want Brexit. But the whole offering by Labour on the whole matter of Brexit has been woolly. It's been difficult to know whether are they actually in favour of the single European market. Are they in favour of the customs union? We really don't know.
I think it was really welcome to see Keir Starmer set out a clear set of tests about what Labour would do around Brexit.
Wouldn't it be fun to hear Jeremy Corbyn set it out?
Well, indeed, but what I was going to say to you, John, was that Keir Starmer was working on the basis of having all of these answers to European questions and then taking a view on what Labour's final position would be on that. We're going to need to see answers from the Prime Minister a lot earlier now. She's going to have to say very clearly whether we're going to stay in the single market, whether we're going to stay in the customs union. So I think you'll see much stronger clarity from the UK Labour Party. Derek will agree with this. I have always been very pro-European. I've worked very closely with the SNP government in Edinburgh to argue for the best possible case for Scotland and its relationship with the European Union, and I'll continue to do that, but not at the expense of independence. This is where we part, because Derek will always argue that Europe is more important than our trade with the rest of the United Kingdom, and I know from having gone through the 2014 referendum campaign,
and what we now face is the prospect of an even more right-wing Tory government that may well secure a mandate through Westminster because of the weakness of the Labour Party as led by Jeremy Corbyn. And what we are saying is that Scotland should have a choice. We should be able to choose, is that the path we want to go down? Is that the kind of Scotland we want to have that's entrapped by this process that will have an even more right-wing Tory government?
I mean, given the weakness of the position of both the Tories, the Liberal Democrats and yourselves particularly, given the weakness of that, are you prepared to do pacts, say, for example, in Perthshire? Are you prepared to say, we'll back off and let the Tories win this seat? Is it that desperate?
Absolutely not. I would never do that. I'm going to fight and put forward Labour candidates the length and breadth of the country. What I have to say to you again, though, is there is no appetite for a second independence referendum in Scotland. Time and time again, the polls show that.
This general election is going to be about other matters.
We're going to have to.
We will stand up.
We are going to have to break it up there. Thank you very much indeed.
But back to our main news now. Theresa May's surprise general election announcement. In a complete political U-turn, she called for the vote to be held on June the 8th, saying Britain needed stability and certainty during the Brexit negotiations ahead. But is stability and certainty what she has produced? The Prime Minister's shock move actually triggered turbulence on the financial markets, and our business correspondent Helia Ebrahimi is here. What do they make of it?
Well, the day started with the pound on the slide as panic mounted that the Prime Minister might actually be resigning. As it became clear she was going to stay in situ, you saw this rally with the pound going up and up. I mean, essentially, markets like stability. So no resignation, good news. The chance of a more decisive majority, good news. What's less clear is what this means for UK growth. Economists today were already talking about whether more clarity actually adds up to a more hardline Brexit, and that could drag the UK economy back. And those anxieties were playing out on the stock market, with the FTSE 100 and the FTSE 250 both nosediving. In fact, the main market had its worst day since the referendum last year. But if you speak to investors, they actually are taking this bet that if the Prime Minister has her own mandate, perhaps she can control her own hardliners and have a soft Brexit. But the truth is, at the moment, no one knows. So I think you're going to get more turmoil in the market.
Yes, some people think it'll be harder, some people it'll be softer. Who knows? That's it for this momentous day here in Westminster. From John and the team in Scotland, from Cathy and everyone in Bristol, and all of us here on the Green.